Good morning and welcome to another Dhamma session here with Empty Cloud Monastery. So today we'll be doing the first part of a two-part series on the Ānāpānasati Sutta. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddha and then we'll start looking at this discourse. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the discourse that was selected for today and tomorrow is the Ānāpānasati Sutta. So this is the discourse on mindfulness of breathing. In particular, it's in Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 118. And this sutta is most notable for the 16-step mindfulness of breathing meditation that the Buddha describes. And he also gives the same 16-step mindfulness of breathing practice in many other suttas. So it's not only in this one. But this is the sutta which people normally think of when the 16-step Ānāpānasati meditation is spoken about. And the sutta itself is actually quite a bit longer than I would have time to go through all of it. So I'll be focusing mainly on the 16 steps for the meditation practice itself. So the sutta, it basically opens with the Buddha talking a little bit about how amazing the Sangha is and how the Sangha has lots of really wonderful bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who are practicing very well, and how the elders are teaching the juniors, and with everybody practicing well and helping each other along, then people are making good progress along the path. And he talks about how the different members of the Sangha are focusing on different kinds of practices. So this also is an interesting point that the Buddha is making here. He's pointing out that there are many different ways of practicing meditation, many different ways of training the mind. And the practice of mindfulness of breathing is just one of these many ways. So this also is a very important point because there's a common misconception that if you're Buddhist, therefore you must practice mindfulness of breathing. There's this idea that mindfulness of breathing is the standard meditation which everybody is supposed to do. But if you read the suttas, you'll see that's not the case at all. That although the Buddha himself practiced mindfulness of breathing, and the Buddha did encourage practicing mindfulness of breathing, he also taught many other ways of training the mind, many other meditation exercises that can be done. And different practitioners get better results from different methods. So Anapanasati is still widely used and widely taught because it does get good results for many people. But if one is going to practice mindfulness of breathing, it's important to have some familiarity with what the Buddha himself said about it. Usually when I talk about the 16-step mindfulness of breathing, I use the Aritta Sutta, which is a much shorter discourse that I use mainly because it starts off with the Buddha asking the monks, how do you practice mindfulness of breathing? And one of them, a monk named Aritta, he says, well, I breathe in mindfully and I breathe out mindfully. And the Buddha's like, okay, yeah, that's technically mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, that's true, but that's not what I teach. And then the Buddha goes on to give the 16-step mindfulness of breathing. And one of the reasons why I like using that sutta is because this is exactly the same conversation that you'll have with many people these days. You ask them, how do you do mindfulness of breathing? And they'll answer more or less the way Venerable Aritta answered. They'll say, well, I breathe in mindfully and I breathe out mindfully. And it's like, okay, you're getting started. That's actually, that's not even step 1 of the 16 steps. That's step 0 of the 16 steps. That's the preliminary. But it's getting started. It's always important to start somewhere. So I'm jumping here in the discourse. I'm jumping directly to after the introductory part where the Buddha goes through talking about the practice of the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the different meditation exercises. Then he goes on to say, how is mindfulness of breathing practiced? So katang bhavita anapanasati. How is mindfulness of breathing developed or practiced? Katang bahulikata. So bahulikata, as I said yesterday, means magnified or made much of or done frequently. But it particularly has the meaning of making something fully developed. So bringing it to its fullest manifestation. So this is something in meditation practice. Often when we're practicing meditation, we're only really giving it about 1% of our effort. If you're practicing really hard, maybe 10%. So you're kind of like doing like a little bit of meditation and a whole lot of spacing out. A little bit of meditation, a whole lot of daydreaming. A little bit of meditation, a whole lot of thinking about random things. And that's, of course, a lot better than not meditating at all. But when the Buddha says bahuli kata, he's talking about making the meditation the biggest thing, making your meditation practice the biggest thing in your mind. So much more important than anything else that's going on in your mind. So he says, how is mindfulness of breathing developed and magnified so that it's of great fruit and great benefit? So mahapala hoti mahani sangsa. So mahapala means great fruit. So it brings very good results. And this also is notable because the word pala, which literally means fruit, but it's also used to mean the stages of awakening. So when the Buddha says that mindfulness of breathing, when properly practiced, produces great fruit, he's also saying that it can lead to stages of awakening. So not just ordinary benefits of being 10% happier, or slightly less stressed out at your mind-numbing job or something like that. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about irreversible stages of breakthrough to the genuine nature of reality. And Mahani Sangsa, again, great benefit. Well, what's the greatest benefit? The greatest benefit is freedom from dukkha. And again, dukkha takes many forms. Sometimes dukkha is just that those nagging thoughts of low self-esteem that seem to keep reappearing in the mind from time to time. Well, yeah, that's part of the human experience. And with practice, then we can learn how to overcome that. Can learn how to be free of such troubles and worries. So it's everything from the occasional irritating thought all the way up to complete agony and anguish and torment. So all of that is in the realm of dukkha, and it's overcoming that whole realm of dukkha that is the great benefit that comes from practicing the Buddha's teachings. So this also is what the Buddha is talking about when he says that practicing Ānāpānasati, mindfulness of breathing, is of great fruit and great benefit. And that it can have the great benefit of bringing us out of all of our dukkha, freeing us from all of our dukkha. So then the Buddha begins with giving the meditation instructions. So starting with the preliminary, he says, Ida bhikkhave bhikkhu aranyagatova rukamulagatova sanyagaragatova. So here a monk has gone to the wilderness. So aranyagato. Aranya literally means not controlled by the government. So aranya means not, actually literally it means not owned by the king. But these days we don't have a whole lot of kings anymore. But a wilderness means a place which is not part of civilized land. So going outside of the city, outside of the towns, into a place where you're not going to be disturbed. So aranya is sometimes translated as forest, but that's not quite correct. It means wilderness. So you could also go to a desert if you want to, or an empty field up in the mountains. It doesn't really matter as long as it's away from the distractions of society. Rukamulagato means the foot of a tree. So sitting under a tree is something also the Buddha recommends for practicing meditation. Sitting under a tree has a few major benefits. One is that you're in the shade. But another notable benefit is that often at the base of a tree, the land slopes up slightly. So then you don't need to use a sitting cushion. So the ground itself gives you a little bit of back support. Next, sunyagara gato. So sunyagara means empty house. So again, the Buddha here is encouraging that we go somewhere where we can practice without being distracted. So an empty house, this has a few meanings. So the simplest meaning is a house where there's no one else living there, no other people, where it's just you alone in the house. Then you don't need to worry about being distracted by other people's activities or presence. Another meaning of sunyagara is having very few possessions. So often if you happen to walk into a monk's room, which you shouldn't do without permission, but if you happen to walk into a monk's room, you might notice that they don't usually have very many things. Their room is usually relatively empty. And there's something incredibly peaceful about that. The fewer possessions you have, the more peaceful the mind is, which is the opposite of worldly thinking. Worldly thinking is that the more possessions you have, the happier you are. But our actual experience is the opposite. The fewer possessions you have, the more spacious and free the mind feels. And this is especially true when you're trying to practice meditation. If you go into a cluttered room with a bunch of junk everywhere, then your mind is going to similarly feel cluttered and messy. But if you go into a room where it's very open and spacious and simple, then that helps to encourage your mind to also be open and spacious and simple. So this is really especially exemplified in the Chan school of Buddhism. So the various branches of Zen Buddhism commonly have this very sparse, simple aesthetic in the meditation hall especially, but in the monastery in general. And this helps to support that openness and spaciousness and stillness of mind. The more cluttered and messy your life is, then the more cluttered and messy your mind will be. And vice versa. The more simple and open and uncluttered your life is, then the same for your mind. So next the Buddha says, Nasidati palankang. That means one sits down cross-legged. So this is actually quite an important statement. So the Buddha does emphasize sitting in the cross-legged posture whenever possible. So of course, if you're physically incapable of sitting cross-legged, it's okay to sit in a kneeling position or to sit in a chair. But if you can, you should optimally be sitting in the cross-legged position, and optimally in the lotus position if possible for you. And it is possible for you. I've known people who, actually Bhante Ji is a good example. So Bhante Gunaratana was sitting quarter lotus for half his life. And then when he was in his 50s, as I recall, then he was just like, okay, let's be realistic. The Buddha encouraged us to sit in the full lotus position. I should at least try. So in his 50s, he built up the flexibility of legs necessary to sit in the full lotus position. And now he's almost 100 years old and he's still sitting in the full lotus position. So for the first 50 years of his life, he never once used the lotus position. For the last 50 years of his life, that's all he's been using. So some people say like, oh, I'm too old. And I'm like, go talk to Bhante Ji and tell him you're too old to sit full lotus. Or they say, oh, you can only do that if you start when you're young. Again, go talk to Bhante Ji. Ask Bhante Ji if you have to start when you're young. Of course, it's easier if you're younger because your body is usually more flexible. But there really is no excuse unless you've got a broken leg or something. Next he says, Ujung Kayang Panidaya. So one sets the body upright. So sitting up straight. So I find it interesting here that the Buddha is emphasizing physical posture. Sometimes there's the stereotype that in Theravada, we don't really care about your posture. We just care about what you do with your mind. I don't know where this comes from because it's not coming from the Buddha. The Buddha did talk about the importance of posture. So again, sitting cross-legged on the ground and sitting up straight. Next, Parimukkhang Sating Upatipetva. So this means establishing mindfulness as foremost. So establishing this clear resolution that mindfulness, maintaining unbroken mindfulness is the most important thing. So it's more important than anything else. Then the Buddha says, so satova asasati, satova pasasati. So this means one breathes in mindfully and one breathes out mindfully. So again, this is before we've even started the 16-step mindfulness of breathing. So as I mentioned earlier, breathing in and out mindfully is step 0 of the 16 steps. That's not even step 1. It's part of the preliminary, so setting up the mind, getting ready. So first you position your body. So you find a suitable place to meditate. You position your body in a good meditation posture. You focus your intention on maintaining mindfulness, and then you start paying attention to your breathing. So this is all the preliminary of preparing yourself to do the 16 steps. Then we go into the first step. So digang wa asasanto digang asasamiti pajanati. So breathing in long, one understands, I breathe in long. So this doesn't mean that you're trying to make your breaths be long. So we're not trying to control the breathing, but rather we're trying to be aware of its condition. So if your breathing is long and deep, then be aware that your breathing is long and deep. And the next line, similarly, digang va pasasanto, so breathing out long. So whether you're breathing in or breathing out, if it's a long breath, be aware that it's a long breath. So very simple. And the second step, rasang va asasanto rasang asasamiti pajanati. So inhaling a short breath. Then just know that you're inhaling a short breath. Or exhaling a short breath. Know that you're exhaling a short breath. So it doesn't actually matter if your breathing is fast and shallow or long and deep. The important thing is that you're clearly aware. You're clearly aware of the shape of the breath. You're clearly aware of the experience of breathing. So the first 2 steps are simply about an awareness. It's not yet to the point of training the mind in anything in particular, but it's just in developing a clear awareness of the experience of your breathing. Then the third step, sabbakaya patisangvedi asasamiti sikkati. So sabbakaya patisangvedi. This is a very important element of actually any mindfulness practice. So the 16-step mindfulness of breathing, although it's focused on breath meditation, it's actually also quite relevant to any mindfulness of the body practice. So though I don't personally do mindfulness of breathing, I still find the 16-step mindfulness of breathing very useful because these same steps can be applied to many other meditation practices as well. So this particular one, sabba kaya patisangvedi. Sabba means entire. Kaya means body. So sabbakaya means your whole body, the entire body. And patisangvedi means experiencing. So sabbakaya patisangvedi simply means experiencing your entire body. So this means that as you're breathing in, you're not just focusing on the breath sensation at the tip of your nose, or the breath sensation in your abdomen, or the breath sensation in your lungs, but you're feeling your entire body. So the whole physical body, from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. You're trying to have a clear awareness of your entire body. And this is very important, because if you narrow your attention to the point where you start excluding awareness of your whole body, then you're actually not cultivating mindfulness. You're cultivating the opposite. You're cultivating mindlessness. You're cultivating a loss of awareness. And ultimately, that can lead into the mind falling asleep or blacking out or shutting down for periods of time, which has nothing to do with awakening. In fact, it's the opposite of awakening. It's not a sign of wisdom. In fact, it's the opposite of wisdom. So it's important to keep your field of awareness broad and open and spacious. If you narrow your field of attention, then what you're actually doing is teaching your mind to ignore reality. You're teaching your mind to shut off, to shut down, rather than to be aware. So it's very important to train yourself to be clearly aware of your whole body as you breathe in and out. So not letting your field of attention become narrow or exclusive. Then the fourth step is pasambayang kaya sankharam asasisamiti sikati. So while breathing in, one trains oneself. I will breathe in tranquilizing bodily activities. So this one requires some explanation. So pasambayang means tranquilizing or stilling, pacifying. And kaya sankhara, so kaya again means body or physical. And the word sankhara is one of these Buddhist technical terms which doesn't easily translate into any one word. So sankhara you'll commonly see translated as formations, which is okay for most uses. Sometimes it more accurately translates as activities. I've seen it translated as choices, but I think that completely misses the point. So I'm not a fan of that one at all. So here, when we're talking about bodily sankharas, so kaya sankhara, the formations of the body or the activities of the body, one of the simplest ways of understanding this is that we're stilling all physical activity. So we're bringing the body to a state of complete stillness. So as you breathe in, stilling the body, bringing all physical activity to complete standstill. And breathing out, again, as you breathe out, stilling the body, calming the body, pacifying the body. So as you breathe in, calming and stilling the body. As you breathe out, calming and stilling the body. So you're using the rhythm of the breath as something that's soothing you. Kind of like when you're petting a cat, like your hand is going back and forth and the cat's becoming calmer and calmer. So in the same way, it's like as you breathe in, you're calming the body. As you breathe out, you're calming the body. As you breathe in, you're calming the body. As you breathe out, you're calming the body. So in this way, you'll start settling deeper and deeper into a state of stillness and serenity. And this is focusing particularly on the body. So this is another element of Buddhist practice, which is it's very, very useful to start with the body. If you try to go directly to training the mind, it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy to get swept up in the maelstrom of thoughts and emotions inside the mind. So starting with the body, well, the body is relatively stable by comparison. The body is relatively steady. So by starting with the body, then it's easier to stabilize and steady the mind. So I might actually stop at this point. So I've gone through the introduction and the first 4 steps of the mindfulness of breathing practice. After this, the next 12 steps are getting into training the mind. And this is getting increasingly interesting. I might actually go through a little bit more. I'll go through steps 5 and 6, and then save the rest for tomorrow. So step 5 in Pāli is piti patisangvedi asasisamiti sikkati. So piti means euphoria. So piti patisangvedi means experiencing euphoria. So this line means I will breathe in. So training oneself, I will breathe in, experiencing euphoria. And training oneself, I will breathe out, experiencing euphoria. So in other words, we're trying to perceive our body as pleasant, to build up a sense of euphoria and pleasure in the body as we're breathing in and out. Again, kind of like if you're, I'm going to talk about antique technology here. So if you're using bellows to build up a fire, so like you're pumping the bellows and the fire slowly gets hotter and hotter, brighter and brighter. So in the same way, as you're breathing in and out, that's like the bellows that's fanning the flames of euphoria. It's building up this heat, this warm, pleasant glow of euphoria in the body. So as you breathe in, you're trying to really enjoy the experience of your body. Enjoy the experience of breathing, to bring a perception of pleasantness to the body as you breathe in. And similarly, as you breathe out, bringing a sense of relief and pleasure and joy to the experience of the body. So it's very important to point out that pleasure is a perception of mind which can be directly controlled. So sometimes we think, oh, my body just feels crappy this morning and there's nothing I can do about it. But that's not true. There is something you can do about it. You can choose to perceive your body as pleasant. And then your body will actually feel pleasant. It actually starts to feel good. So this training of the mind, so training the mind to experience the body as euphoric, is a very important part of our practice. Also because piti, euphoria, is one of the necessary components of first jhana. So if you're interested in getting into jhana, which you should be, because the Buddha said we should be, if you're interested in getting into jhana, then it's necessary to learn how to build up a sense of euphoria in the body. And the way you do this is through practice. So try to experience the body as pleasant, and try to increase and magnify that sense of pleasantness in the body. And similarly, the sixth step, sukha patisangvedi asasisamiti sikkati. So sukha, similarly to piti, so piti is euphoria. Sukha is a more general sense of happiness or bliss. So a more serene, peaceful kind of happiness. Sometimes it's spoken as piti as physical, and sukha is mental. And there's some validity to that interpretation. But the way I normally relate to it is that piti is more of a electric kind of euphoria. So this kind of like intense, almost exciting pleasure. Whereas sukha is more of a serene, still kind of pleasure. So piti is kind of like the happiness of whitewater rafting, whereas sukha is like the happiness of drifting in a boat on a still, clear lake. So it's a similar kind of enjoyment, but piti has that more intense, exciting kind of quality to it, whereas sukha is more of a serene, peaceful kind of pleasure. But both of these are experienced through the body. So it's through the body we cultivate the sense of euphoria and happiness with each breath. And this also is necessary because it's important to learn how to enjoy meditation practice. If you're dreading meditation, if you think of meditation as some horrible, painful chore, then yeah, you're not going to be looking forward to it. And when you do actually meditate, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. So instead, we should be cultivating a sense of pleasure and happiness in our meditation. And this can be done deliberately. So many people think that if they just wait and wait, then someday happiness will just kind of magically appear all by itself. And sometimes that's how it works. But usually we have to make a deliberate effort to cultivate happiness in the mind. It's kind of like if you're a farmer and you want to grow a field of wheat. You don't just wait and wait and wait until one day wheat just magically appears in the fields. You have to actually go out there and plant the seeds, cultivate the ground, water the seeds, remove any weeds, any bad plants that are getting in there, remove the stones from the soil. Like you have to actually put some effort into growing the right plants in the field. You can't just wait and hope that the right plants will appear all by themselves. It's the same with our meditation practice. If you just sit down and wait for enlightenment to just magically appear all by itself, well, you're going to be waiting a very long time. And results are not guaranteed. But if you make a deliberate effort to cultivate the right states of mind, then you can get good results. So that's the same here. Often people sit down to meditate and they're waiting for it to become enjoyable and waiting for years for their meditation to become pleasant. But actually, if you make a conscious effort to cultivate euphoria and pleasure in your meditation, then it'll actually appear. And it'll appear much, much more quickly than waiting. So that's the main point I want to make here, is to really deliberately make an effort to cultivate euphoria in your meditation practice. So I think I'll pause at this point and we'll resume the rest tomorrow. So we can end the sutta reading part of the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I'll take any questions that you might have. So I see there's a few questions online already. So first off, hello to everyone who's joining in. So hello to Charles Lee, Jayanta, John, Amaranta, Melissa, Geeta, Sud, Sam, Kumu, Bobby, Aicha, Samayak, yeah, welcome. And Egad, welcome. So here's one question. Aicha asks, why is it so important to try and sit in the full lotus position? Why did the Buddha insist on that? Well, the Buddha didn't insist on it per se, but rather it's recommended. And it's recommended because it's supportive. It's supportive of the body, for one. But you can also notice a difference in the mind. So this is something which I've really come to appreciate, especially in the last few years. It's a relatively subtle difference. So this is not necessarily a difference that you're going to notice in your first few years of meditation practice. But I can definitely feel a difference in my mind between sitting, say, quarter lotus and sitting full lotus. There's a difference in the mind. There's sharpness and brightness in the mind when one is sitting in full lotus. Again, don't take my word for it, but try it out. So yeah, I've gone through long periods of time of sitting only quarter lotus, long periods of time of sitting only full lotus, and switching between them, really closely watching. Is there a difference? And I've had to come to the inescapable conclusion that yes, there is a difference. And yes, sitting in the full lotus position does support meditation practice. So you can do it. There's various stretching practices you can do that will help to open up your hips. To a lesser extent your knees, but the really important joints to work on are your hips, so that you can sit in the full lotus position. That said, by the way, it's very important to sit correctly if you're going to use full lotus. So make sure you get someone who knows how to sit in the lotus position correctly to make sure that you're doing it right, or else you can injure your ankles. So briefly speaking, it's important that your feet are all the way up on the opposite thigh, so that the ankle is not bent at all. So the ankle should be straight, not bent or twisted in any way. If your ankle is twisted, then you're bound to cause some injury to your tendons over time. Then Sud asks, at the point where you experience the whole body, so do you do this by trying to experience the breath coming in and out throughout the body? Or as you're breathing in and out, you're trying to be mindful of the body's sensation? Actually, one way is just to relate to your body as being like a balloon. So your whole body is a body-shaped balloon that inflates and deflates with each breath. So you're just feeling the whole body like gently expanding and contracting with each breath. So feeling your whole body. If you're used to fixating on some particular breath sensation and you're not used to feeling your whole body, then you might start by just practicing with being aware of your entire body all at once. So forget about your breath for a little while and just focus on feeling your whole body all at once as a single contiguous object. What does it feel like to feel your body as a single indivisible object? And once you become familiar with that, then you can start incorporating mindfulness of breathing with that whole body awareness. I should point out, by the way, just for the sake of completeness, that there's a later apocryphal tradition of interpreting that to mean not the whole body, but being aware of your whole breath, which I don't agree with at all, because if that's what the Buddha meant, he would have just said that. But the Buddha did not say experience your whole breath. He said experience your whole body. So there must be a reason why he said experience your whole body. And the only possible explanation is because he actually meant to experience your whole body. But just for the sake of completeness, you should be aware of this, because many teachers who teach mindfulness of breathing will say that you should be focusing only on the breath sensation and ignoring the rest of your body. But that's because of this apocryphal tradition, which has nothing to do with what it actually says in the sutta. So the sutta clearly says to experience your whole body as you breathe in and out. Next, Charles Lee asks, how is Ānāpānasati related to Satipatthana and jhana? Actually, that's explained later on in the Ānāpānasati Sutta. So after the 16 steps, the Buddha speaks about how mindfulness of breathing fulfills all four of the Satipatthanas. So I'll talk a bit about that tomorrow. I won't go into depth, but briefly speaking, that's in this discourse. And how is it related to jhana? Because as you develop mindfulness and concentration, and particularly as you cultivate piti and sukha, then you'll start to move in the direction of jhana. Actually, Ānāpānasati meditation is the most commonly taught way of entering jhana. And Kumu says, So as I understand, the order 1 to 4 is not important, and it is about observing the breaths as they occur. Long breath maybe after the short, or 2 short breaths, one after the other, etc. Yeah, so the length of the breath is not important. What's important is to be clearly aware of the experience. So it doesn't matter whether your breathing is long or short. It doesn't matter whether it's deep or shallow. It's actually beside the point. What's important is the quality of attention that we're bringing to the breathing experience. So we're not trying to make our breath be any particular way. So when practicing mindfulness of breathing, you're letting the breath be natural. And sometimes the natural course of the breath is to be very slow, very deep, very long. Sometimes the natural course of the breath is actually quite quick and shallow. It doesn't matter. It's completely beside the point. Sometimes the breath will be very heavy and ragged. Other times it becomes so subtle and soft that it almost seems to disappear. Again, it doesn't matter. The important thing is to be clearly aware of the breathing experience. So after you get past the first couple of steps, then there is a clear sequence that the Buddha is giving. But the initial thing of long breath and short breath, that's not a sequence. It's just about establishing awareness of the breathing process. But after that, so experiencing the whole body, tranquilizing the body, developing euphoria, and so on. There's a clear sequence building up there. So there, I do believe it's important to pay attention to the order that things are given in. So then Bobby asks a question, and I don't quite understand this question. It says, is it important not to relate the euphoria of some sorts of meditations as an aspect of nibbana? So the euphoria that occurs during meditation is still part of samsara. So in that sense, that's correct. It's important to not consider it nibbana because it isn't. It's part of samsara. But it's also part of the cultivation of the Buddha's path. So developing an experience of euphoria. So euphoria in the body, joyfulness in the mind. This is a very important part of Buddhist practice. In fact, piti is one of the 7 factors of awakening, the 7 bojjhanga. So this is one of the necessary factors of the path. So if you wish to attain awakening, it is necessary to learn how to cultivate euphoria. So this is not like some optional extra credit thing for people who really like samadhi. It's actually a critical component of the path to awakening. And it's not self-indulgence. So that's another criticism that people sometimes level at, especially at jhana practitioners. It's like, oh, you just want to bliss out in euphoria all the time. It's like, well, yeah, haven't you read the suttas? What do you think we're trying to do here? We're trying to follow the Buddha's instructions, and this is what the Buddha said to do. But it is true. The euphoria that one develops in samadhi practice is not itself nibbana. The euphoria is still a conditional experience that's part of samsara. So it still has the marks of samsara, which is anicca, dukkha, anatta. So of course you don't want to get stuck on that euphoria because it's not the end goal. It's just a step along the way, a useful step along the way, but it's still not the destination. Kumu asks, can one skip steps 1 to 4 and do 5 to 8? No, you don't skip steps. You do the steps as the Buddha gave them. When you start skipping around, then your meditation starts turning into a sloppy mess. Kind of like if you're following a recipe and you decide to start skipping steps and doing things out of order. I mean, if you're an expert, if you're a really good chef and you know exactly what you're doing, then you might be able to pull that off. But if you don't, If you're not an expert chef, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, then you're going to wind up making a disaster. It's like making pasta. So first you boil the water, then you put some salt in the water, then you put the pasta noodles in the water, then you drain out the water, then you add the sauce. Like there's an order. If you start by putting the pasta and the sauce in a pot, and then later on you add some water, well, that's a disaster. That's not going to get good results. You do things in the right sequence. So it's the same with the Buddha's instructions. You do them in the sequence that he gave until you're completely familiar with exactly how it all works and how it all fits together. Then you can get a bit more flexible because at that point you understand what you're doing. But before you really understand what's going on, it's important to follow the steps. Once you have a deep understanding, you can get more creative. But in the beginning, if you try to get creative, you'll just make a mess of things. So I'm a fan of intuitive creativity and meditation practice, but not in the beginning. In the beginning, follow the steps. So coming back to cooking, so I used to do a lot of baking, not these days. I used to do a lot of baking. And anytime I was doing something new, I would follow the recipe word for word the first time. The second time, I would experiment with changing things. But the first time, I would follow the recipe word for word. Then you have some understanding of why the recipe says what it says, and also an understanding of where there's flexibility and you can change things. But the first time, you do it step by step. And Alexis says, did the Buddha mention something about walking meditation? Yes, but not in this sutta. So mindfulness of breathing, the Buddha talks about is something you do while sitting. He does not, I'm not sure of anywhere in the suttas where he talks about mindfulness of breathing while walking. So he does talk about walking meditation in many places, but not in conjunction with breath meditation. And here's someone named P.T. Sukha, great name, says, my question is related to the goal and how to reach irreversible insight. Is it enough to follow the 16 stages of the instruction and the rest comes just by itself, seeing reality how it is? We'll go over that tomorrow. So when I go through the remaining steps, briefly speaking, the 16 stages are a complete path to awakening. So the 16-step Ānāpānasati instructions are a complete path to awakening. And Amaranta says, there is a practice called the nature of experience. How can we relate this with the Buddha's instructions? I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never heard of a practice called the nature of experience. So I would need more information before I could say anything useful on that. That's the last of the questions from online. Anything in person? You have a question?
Bhante, in terms of stillness or stilling the body, as I still the body or that occurs, it still feels like, or I know there's still motion, the heart's beating, the lungs are expanding, blood is flowing, food's being digested. So does that become just, as we still, is that just almost, as you say, sometimes like in the background, like something that's just kind of a minor thing that's moving through?
Yeah. So those kinds of involuntary body activities, it just doesn't bother you. It's like background noise. But what you'll also notice is that if you have an intention of bodily stillness, and like with each breath, you're letting the body become calmer and calmer, stiller and stiller, then you'll also notice that the autonomic body functions also start slowing down.
Hmm.
So there's an interesting case where at one point Ajahn Chah was sick and they brought him into the hospital. And Ajahn Chah is lying on the hospital bed and his breathing is getting slower and slower, his heartbeat's getting slower and slower, and it stops. And the doctor starts freaking out like, oh no, the monk is dying, the monk is dying. But some of Ajahn Chah's students were there and they're like, no, he's not dying, he's just meditating.
Hmm.
Like, this is just what he does, he's totally fine. And he was in fact totally fine. But because his mind was going into deep samadhi, then all of his autonomic body processes were becoming extremely slow and subtle, to the point where the doctor thought he was dying. So this also can happen as your mind becomes very still. And if you're focused on bodily stillness, then those automatic body processes will also start to become more peaceful, more still. And in advanced stages of jhana, then eventually your breathing stops. So the Buddha says in fourth jhana, the breathing stops entirely. You don't die, by the way. Your body just doesn't need to breathe at that point.
And I guess my follow-up question to that is, this is a very pleasant state, and it's a very calming state. How does one then proceed to the other steps, or how do the other steps, because it seems like that, and even in my own experience, like that state is so pleasing, like there's almost a desire to stay in that state.
So enjoying that is naturally leading into the next two steps. So cultivating the stillness and serenity of body, and then enjoying that stillness is a way that you start to bring up piti and sukha. So you're actually already progressing into the fifth and sixth steps. Going beyond that, we'll talk about tomorrow. So normally people divide the 16 steps up into 4 sets of 4, but I actually find it works better as 3 sets. So the first 6 are one distinct set. And then there's another set and a final set. So we'll talk about the next 2 sets tomorrow. Yeah, and it sounds like you're already going beyond stillness. But it's the next practice beyond that is when you start introducing insight. So the first 6 steps are all about samadhi. After that, it becomes about vipassana, which is why I draw a line between step 6 and 7. There's a clear shift in the character of what we're doing at that point. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
So when trying to receive the body as intrinsically pleasant, is it one of those things where, like, let's say I get up in the morning, my body is just aching and groaning and tired, and I just look at it and I'm like, well, you're actually pleasant. Like, sometimes that does seem to work and it like brightens up a little bit, but then sometimes the body is just like, well, no, I'm not. I'm actually in agony right now. Should I be like, should I be developing it as a theme, sort of like with anicca or something like that? Or should I just be continually pleasant, pleasant, pleasant?
One thing which works is to look for the pleasant aspects. So for example, achiness commonly has a component of warmth. So instead of focusing on like my muscles ache, you can be like, oh, there's a pleasant, soothing warmth in my muscles this morning. Okay. So that's actually quite helpful. Yeah. Actually, if you look for pleasantness in the body, you can always find it. Yeah.
So it's really an element of focus, like where the lens is, which is incorrect.
Yeah, if you fixate on what you dislike, then of course your mind is going to be a little bit irritable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes, I do. I will save part of the question for an interview because I don't want to confuse people in terms of practice. But just a quick comment on what you were saying about the Buddha made it clear breathing in, experiencing the entire body. A further proof is obvious, as you said right there in the text, that the Ānāpānasati facilitates the successful practice of Satipatthana and the Bojjhanga, the 7 factors. So if the body wasn't important, you need the feelings the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mental factors.
Mhm.
So yes, it's clear as daylight to me. But the breathing in, the tip of the nostrils is a big theme in a lot of practitioners in the Theravada world. And I've used it and it works.
Mhm.
The mind becomes very subtle, and then you can become aware of the Vedana, but at the expense of blocking out the body. So I was taught to, for the first couple of days in the retreat, forget everything else, background, back to what you leave it in the background. Don't incorporate it, leave it in the background, focus only on respiration at the tip of the nostrils. And so I've had success with that, but yet naturally and intuitively, as you pointed out, the whole body, move into that, bring in the whole body. So it's kind of limbo at times in my practice because of that, because I've had the experience of the focused tunnel vision nostrils and the more expansive aware breathing in, but also bring the whole body along in the inhalation and exhalation. So I'm a little torn
Well,
between those two approaches.
I'll just quote my preceptor on this: do whatever works. And so this is the single most important meditation instruction I've ever received. Do whatever works. So if it works, do it. If it doesn't work, do something else. Anything else? Good. Okay. And I see one more question from online. Sonia Anagarika, another great name, says, is it okay to mix Anapanasati while sitting and mindfulness of the body while walking? Yeah, that's actually a great way to keep your continuity of practice. So when sitting, focusing on the breath meditation, and then when walking, doing walking meditation to have a more general mindfulness of the body. Yeah, that's a commonly recommended way of incorporating the two. So that's the last of the questions. So we can go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we'll see you next time.